Hi, friends. My name is Nia Thomas, and I serve Quakers across New England as part of the yearly meeting staff. And I'm here today recording a conversation about how meetings can support grieving, make space for mourning, and potentially explore virtual memorial meetings in this time. I'm here with two friends, one of whom is Anna Andrews of Stores Friends Meeting in Connecticut. Anna is the former clerk of that meeting and also the current clerk of the Pastoral Care Committee. And through her service at her meeting, Anna has helped plan a number of memorial meetings. And so I think that will be helpful in this conversation. I'm also here with Lisa Graustein, a friend living in Boston whose ministry has involved walking with many different groups through grieving and healing work. And she's also a very experienced virtual facilitator. And I'm hoping that by talking with these two friends that we're able to lift up some aspects of this topic that might be most relevant for your meeting at this time. So Anna, I wonder if we could begin by just sort of talking about memorial meetings and how meetings respond to death in general, not before we even consider the complications of social distancing. Could you just sort of walk us through, in your experience, how Stores Friends Meeting typically would respond when they heard that there had been a loss in the meeting?
Sure. So first thing, when we hear about a loss, we reach out to the family right away, or as soon as we can, to offer our condolences from the meeting community and to see if there are any needs that they have right now in the immediate present, and to listen, to hear how they're coping, and also to plant the seed of an offer of help for planning a memorial meeting if they decide that that's what they'd like to do. And then very soon after we hear about a death, we try to phone everyone in the meeting to let them know that it's occurred. And we do that in person on the phone because particularly if it's someone who's been, if the deceased is someone who's been in the meeting for a long time and is well known, it may come as a shock, it may come as a real loss, and so we want to be available to friends in the meeting as they hear the news and help them process the grief and the sadness. And then as the family decides, if the family decides that they would in fact like to have a Quaker memorial meeting, we appoint a little ad hoc committee. In our meeting, memorial meetings are under the care of ministry and council, which is pastoral care and ministry and worship together. And so we usually have a representative from each of those committees and maybe another person, maybe the clerk or a clerk of either one of those committees. And that committee will then take charge of planning the memorial meeting with the family. We ask one person from the committee to be the liaison to the family because we don't want to bombard them with a lot of phone calls and questions, and we try to funnel everything through one person. And then we'll set up usually in-person meetings with the family if that's possible. If the family's out of state, sometimes it's not possible, but we try to do it in person if we can. Over the years, we've developed a checklist of things that we think that the family might want to consider. So things like, would they like to have music? Would they like to have flowers? Would they like to have refreshments? That kind of thing. And once all of those details are established, then we reach out to the meeting to ask for volunteers to help with providing food or things like parking, greeters, that kind of thing. Mm. And then, once the memorial service has happened, we try to follow up with the family to make sure that well, first of all, I guess to make sure that they found it meaningful and that it helped
Mm-hmm.
in their grieving process, and then also to see if there's any other needs that they might have that we could be helpful with.
Mm-hmm. That's a really helpful sort of list. I know each loss is different, and so I'm sure you sort of modify as you go, but that's helpful. And hearing it, some of the things wouldn't change in this situation where we're, isolated in our homes, but some of the things certainly would need to change. And I'm sure you're thinking about how that might be different. And I'm wondering, Lisa, if you have any thoughts on aspects of this that might look different.
Yeah, so I think two things at the start. So one is to name that we're living in a different time, that all of us are experiencing grief and fast and slow moving trauma. And that means we are thinking less clearly, remembering things less well, we're quicker to be upset or angry, and that details are going to escape us. So just to acknowledge that that's true for all of us now. And then logistically, I think the way to start to think about this is not how do we do everything virtually, but what we would do, what's the fundamental function or purpose it's serving, and how can we meet that underlying need? So for example, bringing food to people's houses, that to me serves two functions. One, it's about making sure that the people who are most deeply grieving don't have to try to figure out how to prepare a meal. And it's a way of showing our care and compassion. And so right now, it means putting food in Tupperware containers, wiping them down, maybe getting a big container that can live outside the front door of the bereaved's house that things can go in, putting wipes in there so they can wipe it down before they pick it up. So we're still doing that food transfer, but we're the ones taking the responsibility for how to make sure we're minimizing transmission risk in that process. And then the aspect of being able to show care, we can't always go and be with each other right now, but maybe friends take turns pulling up in their cars outside the bereaved's house and waving to them, holding them in prayer, praying, playing a song for them. Some of their aspect of saying, I am here with you, even if I can't physically be in contact with you. We might also think about doing, right, memorials are for the living. They're for us to process our love and grief over the person we have lost. And a virtual memorial cannot take the place of an in-person one. So it might be that we move to a practice of doing two memorials, of doing some virtual stuff in the week or two after, with the promise that once we can congregate again in person, we will have another memorial. I think about childcare as a parent as being a huge issue. And so it might mean the meeting thinking about who in our community has been quarantined for 14 days, feels comfortable with taking some risk level, and is able to offer some childcare. If that's not an option, I know my friend the other day had to do an errand she had to do in person. She has a 5-year-old. She didn't want to take him out of the house. She set him up with a video. I was on FaceTime with my phone in the car outside her house with her house keys with him. So I was watching him. He was engaged. She was gone for 45 minutes. If something had come up, I had the keys to the house. I could have gone in and helped him. I was 30 seconds away. But in that case, we didn't have to have any contact for her to feel okay leaving her 5-year-old. And I'm thinking about where a parent might need those 30 minutes to go in the bathroom, turn on the shower, and cry and wail and moan and know that their kid is being cared for from a distance. And then I think thinking through all the other things that Anna named and what does that look like now? So where we reach out to friends, where we find out who wants a phone call versus a text versus a Zoom, how we might make a piece of art about the person that has been lost to share with their family, where we play a song, where we take different times where we let the family know, and like, I'll be praying for you from 10 to 10:30, Anna from 12:30 to 1, those kinds of things, of all the ways that we can show our care and presence while still maintaining the distance we need to keep people safe and healthy.
Mm-hmm. I've been thinking about how, the memorial meetings, certainly can serve an important function for those, loved ones, family, but also how often a part of their function is for the meeting community to acknowledge a loss. And I'm wondering, Anna, from your experience, if you have anything that feels relevant to share sort of about what you've observed from what a meeting community needs when someone's lost, especially an unexpected loss?
Yeah, it's difficult. We've had actually a recent experience where we had a friend and her partner who were part of our meeting for many years, and about 4 years ago they moved away to a different state, and she'd had some serious illness and passed away, and her family had decided to hold the memorial later in the summer, and our community kept saying, well, we've lost her in now a second way. You know, we lost her when she moved, and now we've lost her into death. And so we decided that we'd like to have a memorial just, you know, for our community. And we did, you know, let her partner and her family know that we wanted to do that. And it was very meaningful to us as a community because she'd been such an important part of our meeting. But I think you're right, Nia, that particularly when there's a sudden loss, that there are some other needs that might come up. And I'll say from our experience, we had unfortunately 2 deaths by suicide. And after the first one, you know, there were I think suicide is a very complicated and difficult kind of death that, you know, exacerbates all the feelings that we have regarding death anyway. But so one of the things that we did was invite in an outside person, a therapist, who helped us process some of the feelings that people were having, because that was a difficult one to deal with. And so I think there are, you know, as a community, when there's a loss, that people really do need to come together there in some way. And I've loved to hearing Lisa's descriptions of some of the ways in which we might, in these times, provide that kind of support to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Can I add to that a little bit, Nia?
Yes.
From my work in communities that have a high frequency of trauma, we also know that grief is compounded. And so in a time when there's a disproportionate number of people dying, one death can feel like 2 or 3. And particularly in communities that are being hard hit right now, even if we don't know all the people who are dying, the news feed of seeing those numbers, and so that we acknowledge the grief we're feeling might feel disproportionate at some level to what's happening. And it's weird to talk about anything being disproportionate when somebody's life has ended, but that we acknowledge that and how different ones of us respond is going to be different. So some people may want to be talking about their grief a lot, and other people may need to set up some boundaries because it feels overwhelming. Mm-hmm. And so I think ways that a community can help with that is to set clear times and spaces to talk about grief, to talk about how we're feeling, that have a beginning, a middle, and an end, so that people can say, okay, I can go to some hard places with my feelings because I know there will be an end time to this, or I know I can show up to this meeting social hour because it's not for grief, because the grief time is in a different place. Because one of the things we also need while we're grieving is some semblance of normalcy and moments to say, right now I'm just making dinner and I'm not thinking about all these things. And it's not about perpetual denial, but it's about that balance of how we move in and out of our being with our feelings. And so I think as we get further into this pandemic, if meetings can say, here's a social hour just to share jokes and conversation and keep it light, and here's a time to talk about how we're feeling or who we've lost. If there are multiple losses in a short time span in a community, of maybe saying, we will let people know in a 4 p.m. email, so that I can know when I go to my email, I'm not going to get things at 10 and at noon and at 1, but like this is the time when it's going to show up, using a common heading so that people have some preparation before they open, thinking about how we help people know what's coming in a time where we don't know what's coming, how we set boundaries around things, and how we acknowledge that it is okay to have some levity and joy, and it's important to feel our grief, but that we're not going to mush all those things together. We're going to be clear what we're offering so people can choose the right thing for themselves at a given time.
Mm-hmm. I love that also, because I think it gives an opportunity for people with really different gifts to contribute to the meeting's healing process. You know, someone could be great at managing the listserv and, gathering all the emails that are related to the loss into a digest. Someone else might be great at hosting that, levity event, but wouldn't be the best person to facilitate a meeting for healing or something like that. Yeah.
And I think too, as we've all moved to doing worship on Zoom, I've been on a bunch of worships where it's like, well, thank you, friends, and now announcements. And in meeting, we shake hands, we come into contact. So also thinking about when we're beginning and ending these times, as a people without ritual, we need some ritual. And ritual has always been a way that humanity has managed grief. And so when I had care of meeting for my meeting yesterday, I invited us to start by breathing together. So this on the inhale, this on the exhale, so that sense of connection. And when we closed meeting, I saw a friend do this, that notion of like, my heart to you. And so ritual is going to become more important. Beginnings and endings are going to be really important. I led a workshop around feeling our grief this weekend. And at the end of it, I invited people to pour water over their hands as a sense of like, this particular time mourning is done. Our mourning collectively is not done. But for those of us who were raised in other traditions, who come from cultural traditions that have some more ritual, now is the time to bring some of that ritual into our unprogrammed traditions, because they help us process. So things we can do with our bodies, things that communicate contact with each other, things that denote a shift from talking to feeling or from worship to discussion, all of that is going to help us process, manage, move through, and be with our grief during this time.
Yeah. That's really helpful to think about that, even though we can't connect physically in person, it doesn't mean that all physical or, body-based expressions of care and connection are off the table, right? Go ahead.
So one thing that one friend suggested, and people need to manage their own risk levels around this, but that physical touch is really important when we're grieving. But that if somebody puts on an extra hooded sweatshirt, comes to their door porch with their back facing out, and I, as someone who is masked and gloved, I can come and put my hands on that person's back. I can offer them touch and contact. If they then, when we're done, remove their sweatshirt and put it in the laundry, that's been a very, very low risk contact point. And even if we don't have training in energy work, the basic premise is, I care for you, I hold reverence for you, and I'm offering you what you need. I'm not about taking or changing, but just offering. So if somebody has suffered a loss and they need to stay in isolation, if there is someone in the community who feels like they could just do that touch with consent, that can be incredibly important, particularly as we all go into further weeks of isolation.
That kind of makes me think that, Anna, you spoke to the importance of, reaching out to loved ones early on and listening for what the needs were, not sort of coming in with an agenda. And I think what Lisa's idea spoke to is that you can listen for what the needs are and then think through what the lowest risk way that you can help meet those needs for those friends is. So one thing that I want to touch on a little more before we wrap up this conversation is, I know some meetings will be exploring having virtual memorial meetings. And I think it's helpful, Lisa, that you already started to talk about ritual. And I wonder, Anna, if you could lift up, just in your experience with memorial meetings, what you have observed are sort of meaningful parts of that ritual. And then maybe we can sort of brainstorm what are some possible ways to still have those meaningful aspects, but just reimagine them a little bit.
Yeah, I think that Quaker memorial meetings are one of the most beautiful things that we do in our tradition. I think we've always had such wonderful feedback from people who've come to a memorial meeting and have never experienced a Quaker worship before, and found that the memorial meeting was very meaningful, that it really reflected the person's whole being, and that we saw parts of the person that we may not have known about. And so I think that sharing the messages, particularly that people can share about the deceased, is really important. I think for some people, music is really important as part of making a memorial meeting meaningful. And some people like to have readings or poems. We don't generally have candles in our worship room, but I know for some people that a candle is really important. And that might be something that could translate to a virtual meeting.
Mm.
So those are the things that come to mind. I'm sure there are others.
Yeah, everything that you said resonates for me. And another thing that resonates for me is that it's sort of a designated time when everyone in the community can sort of simultaneously be with, the family or those who are closest to whoever was lost. Yeah.
I think one thing we could consider adding to memorial minutes would be asking those gathering virtually to find an object in their house that in some way embodies something they cherished about the person who has passed, to bring with them. That we lose the physicality in not being together, but we can get some aspects of it. And then whether or not they give a message during the memorial, if they took a picture of that object and wrote a little note to the family about, this is why I brought a seashell or my garden shirt. It's a way of again letting the family know that their loss is seen and felt and heard and shared, and that the pieces we honor about that person live beyond just their immediate family. That's something. I lost my mom 15 months ago, and so it's very helpful for me to know that other people know and remember these things about her, that helps me in my grief. Mm-hmm. So thinking about those things that we would say during the fellowship time of a memorial, or that we might, put an arm on somebody and do. We can't do that, but we can do other aspects that say, this person you have lost is beloved to me too, and I share that with you, and a piece of their essence I carry with me. And that's what a lot of ritual and other cultures and practices do. But where I think we can do things like that aren't going to feel unquakerly, but that we can add to our practices during this time of separation.
Mm. Yeah. Well, as we wrap up this conversation, I just wonder, Anna or Lisa, if anything else is on your mind or heart that you'd like to share.
I think about the power of prayer, and how I think it works even when the person I'm praying for doesn't believe in prayer. And given our theological diversity in the yearly meeting, I'm wondering if, as ministering councils and pastoral care committees check in with friends, if they ask friends, what's the language or imagery you like when you're prayed for? That we have friends who want prayer in the name of Jesus. We have friends who would invite the light or divine. We have non-theist friends who might want a nature imagery or good energy. But knowing that ahead of time means when somebody has a family member who is sick, or they themselves are sick, we can not only pray in alignment with their theology, but we can say, I'm holding the image of a tree for you now with deep roots, or I'm praying in Jesus' name for you, or I'm holding light, so that our care from a distance can be as well aligned as possible for what that person needs in the moment. And that the questioning ahead of time is not just preparation for a negative what if, but is a community building, saying, I honor your theology and want to be with you and pray with you, and I honor your theology and want to be with you and pray with you.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a beautiful way to end the conversation in a way, because it really wraps up all of what we hope for, and in the work that we do, in the service that we want to provide, the help that we want to give, is beautifully stated. Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah, and it's a hopeful reminder that no matter where we're at as meeting communities, we can always do the work of preparing to be with each other through hard and joyful stretches. and that there's always an opportunity for that. Well, thank you, Lisa and Anna, for being with us, for sharing your thoughts. To everyone listening, I hope this is helpful to you in thinking through how your meeting is led to support your community at this time. And I hope you'll continue to be in conversation with us and to be following along for the resources that we're providing at neym.org. Thank you. Bye.